All right, welcome back to Economic Lifelines. We've seen how AMCON has intervened in the banks and, of course, some manufacturing companies in Nigeria. Now we learn about how it has intervened in the aviation sector, a sector that employs well over 5,000 people, and many say was really on the brink of collapse until AMCON stepped in. Running an airline business in Nigeria is tough work. Dilapidated facilities at the airports and weak infrastructure means that all airlines already face a difficult environment made worse by high financing costs. Aero Contractors is one airline that weathered the storm until a financial crisis hit in 2008. Can you just share with us a brief history of Aero Contractors up to the time that AMCON got involved in your business?
Okay, as you probably know, Aero started operations in 1959 with charter services to the oil and gas industry using basically helicopters. Over the next 4 decades, they established a reputation as the safest airline in Nigeria, and they maintained this operation up until 2008 when the financial crisis came and we began to have challenges as a result of that because of what affected our major financier, Oceanic Bank. We felt this challenge in 2 different ways. The financial crisis led to accumulation of debt because our interest costs just overshoot our estimation, and it led to a pile-up of debt for the company because we were not able to pay, and the bank cut out the level of funding that was available to us. The other aspect had to do with our operations. Because we couldn't access funding, we had aircraft on ground which we couldn't access parts to keep in the air. So those are the 2 major ways that we were affected until AMCON came in. It was quite a challenging time for us because we couldn't access the required funding to keep our aircraft flying. However, with the intervention of AMCON, the first major thing that was our problem was to get the necessary guarantees to be able to maintain our power by the hour agreement with Lufthansa Technic, who is our technical partner. So that gave us the access to the required parts we need to keep our aircraft flying. And as you can see, we don't have any aircraft just on ground. The ones you can see are just waiting for the next scheduled flight. Okay, the overall effect of AMCON intervention is to take over our exposure to Oceanic Bank, now EcoBank. When they took it over, they've been able to restructure it to the extent that we are paying single-digit interest rates on those exposures. And the restructuring has also given them an opportunity to be part owners of the company. And the essence is that they get involved in running the company to make sure that the objective of their intervention is met. And that we welcome very much.
We have several loans from the aviation companies in Nigeria. And on a per capita basis, really the aviation companies represent more than any other sector in AMCON. So that means there are some structural issues and problems in the aviation sector. Now, luckily for us, before AMCON even came into being, the central bank has established through the Bank of Industry some intervention fund for the aviation industry. Now, those aviation companies that are already in AMCON, we're helping them to access those intervention funds. So we have been doing that, and we have been seeing the impact in the financials of those companies. Wherever there is a case that we can see that reducing the burden of the debt will help the company improve its cash flow and come out of its woods, we can convert some of the debt into equity. But whenever we do that, we take both positions, and we take especially the finance decisions in those companies, so as to ensure that our money will come back. More importantly also, we ensure that we have an exit strategy in those companies because we don't intend to stay there forever. So every company we have taken equity, we have an exit strategy. At the end of the time when we want to exit, the owners, the original owners, will be allowed to buy at prevailing market prices of those shares, unless if they can't buy before we can invite other outsiders.
Part of our plans for the future is to increase our maintenance capability. As you may know, Aero is the first airline to be able to obtain the license to do third-party work for other airlines. And what AMCON has come to do is to help us to develop our hangar, be able to put it to international standard and get additional equipment and additional expatriates to help us to be able to do this. By the time we finish with this in the next couple of months, we should be able to take up to 5 aircraft at a time within our hangar. The additional thing we need to do is the introduction of new generation aircrafts. We have run all these years with classics, and even though they've given us very good service, but we have to move with the new trend and with the technology. What AMCON has done is to increase our capability to be able to access funding to get into new leases for new generation aircraft. And AMCON is the kind of lifeline, for the aviation industry, and you could say for the economy, because if not for their intervention in banking industry, we would have had systemic crisis in that industry. And because of that intervention, they have now, the sources of that intervention, they've now been able to move to the aviation industry. And I can say today that if not for that intervention, again, there will be no aviation industry in Nigeria as we speak. ARIC is in AMCON, Aero is in AMCON. They are also providing support for smaller airlines so that the teeming population of travelers we have in Nigeria will have choices. This is what AMCON has done. And if they hadn't done this, it would have been difficult to have an aviation industry as of today.
AMCON may have found ways to engage some debtors, but there are cases where AMCON has to deal with unresponsive debtors. One such case is the Delta Steel Company, where workers have been owed salaries for several months before AMCON obtained a court order to take over the struggling steel maker. The move has attracted sharp condemnation from some labor unions that describe AMCON's move as insensitive. The labor unions have therefore threatened to disrupt operations at the company until their salaries are paid. But AMCON argues that it's only acting as a secured creditor, trying to recover what it's owed.
Prior to our takeover of Delta Steel Company, the workers had been owed salaries for over 11 months. Now, while we sympathize with that kind of situation, we, AMCON, as a secured creditor, cannot be expected to also pay the workers, because the workers in the first place did not work for us. They work for another entrepreneur who did not pay them and also did not pay us. So what we will try to do to assuage this kind of problem is to ensure that the sale process will be very transparent, and the value that will be gotten, we hope, will be such that even after we have taken out our loans, those other critical stakeholders will still get their entitlements out of the proceeds.
Considering what AMCON is doing for the aviation sector, some observers also point to the downstream oil and gas sector as another critical sector that requires special treatment by AMCON. Many companies in this sector lost billions when oil prices fell sharply in 2008. But AMCON CEO Mustafa Chikeobi says that the two industries should not be treated the same way.
When you look at the downstream marketing sector, there's many of them. No single one can really claim that if they're out of business, it will cripple the economy. And the subsidy issue and the subsidy payments that they feel they are due from the government, it's a problem for that industry. So the extent to which we're willing to support that industry is different from the critical impact of the airline industry. So you have to approach them all, separately. They all come to us now and say, we will have been fine, but the government is not paying us our subsidy payments that are due. And we can't get involved in that argument. What we want is our money back. We're having a little bit more challenges with that sector today than we'll be having with other sectors. But again, like I said, it's not a blunt instrument, and each one is different. And hopefully we can work through this as we get through this year and next year.
The debt recovery process was never going to be easy, considering the variety of loans that AMCON has on its books. So considering the deadline to pay bondholders, a good question is how well is AMCON doing in terms of recoveries?
It's also designed that we will not get funds until after 2 years. But I can see that as at today, we have close to 50 billion naira in cash as recoveries, even though the second year has just come. So that means we are way ahead of our targets. Secondly, apart from cash, we have also assets that borrowers have willingly forfeited to us in settlement of about 140 billion naira. So that means all in all, we can say that we have recovered close to 200 billion naira in both cash and assets as at today.
AMCON's strategy to provide some support or forbearance to selected companies seems to be enhancing the loan recovery process, at least in some cases. However, some observers question AMCON's capacity to engage over 12,000 debtors and its resolve to take the tough decisions in cases where letting some companies fail is the most sensible thing to do.
If I recall, AMCON took over about 10,000 loans, and those range from north of 5 billion to the hundreds of millions. Now, if you even resolve one loan a day, which is a tough task, that's 30 years amount of work. So there's a huge amount of work to do. They've definitely increased the number of staff there. I think they've got a couple of hundred people there. But even with that, it's very hard to resolve that in the time frame that AMCON's been given. Secondly is the issue of human capacity. Many of these firms were, got into trouble because of lack of management or long-term funds. It's very hard to give the same people money back and expect them to, solve problems. And so I think there's a need to engage specialist funds, technical personnel that have the requisite skill and experience in resolving and restructuring these things. The banks can't do it because the mindset is different. The banks are intermediaries. They don't have the long-term focus. They don't have the will to actually invest more capital. They want more collateral as a result. And they don't have the personnel. I think they have a social responsibility to make the system efficient. Some of these companies need to die because instead of dying, you're plowing good money after bad. And so there's a waste of resources there. It would be better to have those monies channeled into more profitable business, a business that will actually create jobs and employment. So I think the tough decisions have to be made. And I think of those 10,000, I'd be surprised if a fair amount aren't allowed to, just pass into, recovery or bankruptcy. And I think that's a very key point. It has to be done, otherwise you just find that there's an inefficient use of resources in the system, which nobody wants.
While some observers challenge the rationality of AMCON's methods and motives as it engages these debtors, few can argue against the early results, such as seen in manufacturers like SparkWest and airlines like Aero Contractors. And therein lies the irony. AMCON has kept these companies in business and provided a lifeline to some of the companies that forced the historic bailout of their banks in the first place.